I think the main reason has to do with that old parlor game where you challenge somebody to not think about a polar bear for 2 minutes. Usually I have no trouble not thinking about a polar bear for 2 minutes, except when someone tells me that that's what I have to do. And then, of course, all you can think about is polar bears. There's something about focusing relentlessly on trying to fill your mind with happy thoughts, on trying to achieve a certain goal, on trying to eliminate all possibility of failure, that is A, very stressful and therefore not really happiness inducing, and B, for all sorts of reasons that I try to explore in my book, can have just a counterproductive effect, that when you're not open to the possibility of failure, that's exactly when you create systems and approaches that are so brittle that failure becomes all but inevitable. I read Andrew Sullivan's blog too, and I really appreciate those parts of it. He uses the word doubt. I would want to use some phrase like being comfortable with uncertainty. Very closely related, maybe not exactly the same thing. I think that constant quest for closure, for security, for knowing exactly how things are going to be, is something that goes very, very deep. Possibly even sort of in an evolved, sort of almost hardwired kind of a way. But it does, in the modern world, get us into all sorts of trouble. I mean, the most obvious example is just to look at a sort of mundane context, creativity in, say, the business world. It's when you are not completely focused on one specific endpoint, on knowing that everything has to turn out one specific way, is when you can hear, opportunity knocking quietly from other directions. So I think, but then again, he would take it further into onto a whole sort of spiritual dimension, where I think that, being able to rest in mystery is just an absolutely crucial kind of negative skill. I think that the more that we see crises around us, economic, environmental, geopolitical, the more there is this sort of natural response to try to lock everything down, to try to put up the fortifications, and to try to build security. But I always go back to Alan Watts, the great sort of countercultural philosopher of the 60s and 70s, who pointed out that actually the cause of our feelings of insecurity is our attempts to make ourselves as secure as possible. If you don't put up the castle walls, there's nothing for the enemy to attack. And so I do think that it's a very natural instinct, that search for closure, but I think that taken too far, it gets us into trouble all the time. It's really interesting, isn't it? There's been some amazing psychological work into awe by a psychologist called Paul Pearsall, who said that, who argued that actually it's the great undervalued emotion. It's the thing that really, when we look back on our lives, it's what we want to have been able to have felt frequently. And yet, when you think about awe, it's a sort of a mixture of wonder and fear. It's definitely based on not knowing. It's not entirely pleasant. The birth of a newborn baby, or striking off in a new career direction, you are not confident that everything is going to go absolutely perfectly. That is exactly not what you're feeling. If somebody handed you a sheet of paper tomorrow that told you exactly how the rest of your life was going to unfold in every detail, you would hate it, even if what was on that sheet of paper was all good. There would be something that would be like a kind of death. Paul Pearsall talks about this word Opensure, which isn't a very elegant word, but it's his opposite of closure, that actually trying to encourage that is a way to sort of feel much more authentically alive. And he's backed it up with, he's since passed away, but he's backed it up with the studies. This isn't just a sort of wishy-washy insight. This is when you look back and you ask people to rate how they're feeling at different times, and you look back at who the happiest people are. I think it can be argued that they're not the people who feel this kind of monotone of being really upbeat all the time. It's the people who feel awe and awe-inspired. I thought this was an amazing connection. I had never appreciated the connection between fixedness and happiness work. So I'm really grateful for you point this out. Functional fixedness, just to go into a tiny bit more detail, is this idea that we often can't see beyond the existing uses for objects or for computer software or whatever it might be, and that one way around that, according to researcher Tony McCaffrey up in Massachusetts, is to describe the thing that you're dealing with in ways that don't refer to its functions. So you don't refer to a pen as something to write with. You refer to it as a sort of a plastic tube with this and that, and then you suddenly can see that it has other possibilities. And I think that idea of it does closely relate actually to the sense that we have all these ideas about the life that would make us happy, but as Daniel Gilbert and other psychologists have shown, we're very bad at predicting, forecasting what actually will make us happy. And if you just look at your life and when you're happiest, you might well find that they were very different things. So I think in lots of different ways, actually, yeah, I hadn't thought about it till now, but describing what you know has made you happy rather than what you imagine happiness ought to be, I think could be a very, very powerful kind of intervention. I think one of the things that comes up a lot, and that I don't necessarily have a brilliant answer to, is that there is a kind of a paradox involved here. People say, "Well, are you really saying that it's okay to that being very depressed is kind of fine, or are you really saying that there's something wrong with being an optimist?" And this is all mainly because the subtitle of my book is happiness for people who can't stand positive thinking. At that point, I sort of have to say, well, firstly, no, I'm saying that. If you are depressed or know someone who is, or if things are not going well, then positive thinking is not the way out, rather than that there's something wonderful about being mired in negative feeling. The other thing is that this stuff just is paradoxical, and I say right at the beginning, I don't think I'm going to be able to solve these paradoxes. There's a sense in which the positive implies the negative, and vice versa. We can't get away from these binary oppositions, and really all I'm suggesting is that we need to be open to both. That it's psychologically healthier to be open to both sides of the human emotional repertoire in work, in our personal relationships, whatever, rather than to sort of get to the end of your life and say, hurrah, I successfully managed to shut out, one half of what it means to be human. As I'm completely obsessed at the moment with reading about the philosophy of mind and the whole question of how the spongy brain could possibly give rise to the subjective experience of consciousness. And I'm a complete amateur in this world, but I just am completely absorbed in books by philosophers trying to grapple with what it could even mean to say that the brain gives rise to the mind. And yet, on the other hand, if the brain doesn't give rise to the mind, then there's something wrong with the whole of science. So it's kind of it's one of those sort of completely stunning, almost in a literal sense, philosophical questions, alongside the question of why does the world exist, that Jim Holt wrote that great book about a little while ago.
Are you familiar with David Chalmers?
Yes, he's one of these people I love to try to understand. It's when you are not completely focused on one specific endpoint, on knowing that everything has to turn out one specific way, is when you can hear, opportunity knocking quietly.
Yeah, Daniel Dennett had some very sharp rejoinders to the Chalmers version of the hard problem of consciousness. I like reading those. It's like, okay, you can say that again, but I'm not sure I believe it anymore.
No, Dennett is a classic example of a writer who is such a joy to read, even at the same time as I'm saying, I just think you're completely wrong about what you're saying.
It's gone completely bonkers.
Yeah, but he's just a very good writer when he's doing it.
Yeah, I had the unenviable task one time of explaining in 5 minutes the hard problem of consciousness. Oh my God, I never felt so naked and alone in my entire life.
Well, at least nobody else can, I suppose. So you've got that to remember. Yeah.
Oliver, thanks for your time. I do appreciate it, and I am very much looking forward to meeting you in person in September.
Yeah, absolutely. No, me too. It'll be fun.
Okay. Have a great rest of the day.
Thank you.
You bet. Bye-bye.
Bye.